The rope burned deep into Daniel Cole's frozen palms as he dangled from the cliff edge, the Colorado wind screaming like a living thing. 15 feet below, a German shepherd clung to a splintered root above a deadly drop, blood staining the snow beneath its trembling paws. Their eyes met, one filled with fear, the other with faith. Daniel's mind flashed to his daughter's words that morning. "Dad, if a dog ever needed help, you'd save him, right?" The root cracked. The world held its breath. "Hold on, boy," he whispered, reaching through the storm, and in that heartbeat between death and grace, a man reached down, and a miracle reached back. "Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below." Snow fell in thick, blinding sheets over the Silver Creek Mountains, Colorado, where the wind screamed like a living thing and erased the world into shades of white and fear. The mountains loomed dark and merciless, their jagged peaks shrouded in storm clouds that pressed low against the earth. Daniel Cole hung 15 feet down a frozen cliff, his gloved hands torn and bleeding as the rescue rope bit into his palms. The cold gnawed through his parka and into the bones beneath. His breath came in bursts of fog that vanished instantly into the swirling snow. Below him, a German shepherd clung desperately to a brittle root, its rear leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood smeared the ice beneath its paws. Daniel was 42, tall and broad-shouldered from years of forest patrols, his once black hair streaked with early gray at the temples. A trimmed beard framed a face carved by hard winters and harder memories. The faint scar along his jaw was from a wildfire rescue 5 years ago, a night that had cost his best friend's life and carved a silence inside him that no one could fill. The eyes beneath his frost-crusted hood were blue-gray, sharp but heavy with that old guilt he carried like another layer of frost. "Hold on, boy," he muttered through chattering teeth, his voice nearly lost in the storm. The dog, large, sable-colored, perhaps 6 years old, looked up. Its eyes, amber and wild, flickered not with aggression, but with a hollow, aching terror. For a heartbeat, Daniel swore he saw something human in them. Pain, yes, but also resignation, as if the animal had already decided that falling would be easier than fighting. The root cracked under the strain, a sharp report swallowed by the wind. Daniel's radio hissed in his ear. "Cole, abort! Visibility 0, the blizzard's closing in." The voice of dispatch barely cut through static. Daniel ignored it. He looked down again and saw his daughter's face flash in his mind. Lila, 10 years old, red-haired and freckled, standing in the cabin doorway that morning. "If a dog ever needed help, you'd save him, right, Dad?" She'd said it half joking, but the way she'd hugged him goodbye made it feel like a promise. Daniel exhaled slowly, tasting blood where the cold had cracked his lip. "Yeah, honey," he whispered to the storm. "A promise is a promise." He anchored his boots against the cliff and lowered himself another foot, every muscle in his arms screaming. The cliff face was coated with a cruel mix of ice and shale, offering no hold, no mercy. The rope creaked, fibers tightening under his weight. The dog slipped an inch, its claws scraping against the stone, and let out a sound, half growl, half whimper, that went straight through Daniel's ribs. "Easy!" he shouted, though his own voice trembled. "Don't move, I've got you." The dog's paw lost grip entirely. Its body lurched downward. Instinct overrode fear. Daniel lunged, one hand catching the collar of his harness, the other clamping around the dog's thick fur. His glove tore, skin splitting under the strain. Pain flared white, but he pulled anyway, grunting through clenched teeth. For a terrible second, both hung suspended over a 30-foot drop, a man and a bleeding animal bound by a single thread of rope and stubbornness. The storm screamed louder, hurling needles of snow into Daniel's face. His arms trembled violently. "Come on," he rasped. "Come on, don't give up on me." The shepherd's eyes met his again, and something in that gaze shifted, panic giving way to trust, thin and fragile, but real. The dog braced its front paws against the ice, pushing weakly while Daniel hauled upward with everything left in him. Inch by inch, the impossible happened. When he finally dragged the dog onto the ledge, Daniel collapsed beside it, chest heaving, vision swimming with black spots. The shepherd staggered once, then sank into the snow, trembling uncontrollably. Its fur was a mix of wet sable and gray, dusted with ice like powdered glass. Daniel stripped off his parka, wrapped it around the animal's shivering body, and pressed a hand to its flank. He could feel the rapid thud of its heart. Alive, barely, but alive. "You're safe now, soldier," he whispered. He didn't know why he used the word soldier, but maybe because that's what the dog looked like. Battle-worn, scarred, too proud to die quietly. The world above them was vanishing in the storm. The rope line had iced over, the radio gone dead. Daniel looked up the cliff. The ascent was suicide in this wind. "Guess we're staying put till the worst passes," he murmured. He shifted closer to the dog, pulling it against him to share body heat. The shepherd stiffened, then slowly, cautiously, rested its head against his arm. Daniel found himself talking, half to the animal, half to ghosts. "You've seen some things, haven't you?" "So have I." His voice cracked. "Lost people you couldn't save, tried to fix what couldn't be fixed." He paused, breath misting in the air between them. "Well, looks like we're stuck with each other now." A faint noise answered, low, weary, almost a sigh. Snow settled over them in gentle waves, softening the sharp edges of the cliff. For a fleeting moment, it felt like peace. Then the mountain rumbled. A distant crack echoed through the gorge. Avalanche. Daniel's head snapped up, eyes scanning the white void above. The sound was growing, rolling like thunder under the earth. The shepherd jerked upright, ears pricked, body rigid. "Oh, hell," Daniel breathed. He grabbed the rope with his good hand and forced himself to stand. The slope above them was shifting, a ghostly curtain of snow beginning to slide. The dog barked once, sharp and urgent. "Run!" Daniel shouted, though there was nowhere to go. The ledge beneath them trembled, snow spraying into the abyss. Daniel tightened his grip on the rope and the dog's collar. "Hold on, Rex," he said, the name coming to him without thought, as if whispered by the storm itself. The avalanche roared closer, blotting out everything but sound and motion. And then, silence. Only the wind remained, whispering over the edge of the cliff where Daniel and the dog had been standing. Morning came with a pale, bruised light, the kind that never quite reached warmth. The storm had passed, leaving the world around Silver Creek carved in silence and frost. Snow draped over the trees like mourning cloths, and the air shimmered faintly with diamond dust. Daniel Cole awoke on the cabin floor, the fire a dying glow in the stove. Beside him, Rex lay curled, his thick sable coat now dry and matted, one hind leg bandaged with strips torn from Daniel's undershirt. The dog's eyes opened when Daniel stirred, and a low whine escaped him, something between gratitude and ache. "Morning, soldier," Daniel murmured. He reached out, scratching gently behind Rex's ear. The dog leaned into the touch, tail giving one slow, heavy thump against the wood. Daniel couldn't help but smile. "You and I made it, huh? Guess that's something." Outside, the mountains stood bright and cruel under the winter sun. Daniel stepped out briefly, breath frosting the air, and scanned the slope above where the avalanche had torn the cliff face clean. They were lucky, if luck could still be trusted. He had carried Rex back through half a mile of broken snow, his arms trembling, lungs seared raw. But the dog had made no sound the entire way, only pressed his head against Daniel's shoulder as if to say, "Keep moving." By noon, the world was still again. Daniel brewed coffee on the stove, the smell cutting through the cold gloom. He turned when he heard small footsteps behind him. Lila appeared, wrapped in her oversized flannel pajamas, hair a red tangle of curls. 10 years old, but already carrying a calmness that didn't belong to children. Her face still held the softness of youth, but her eyes, green-gray like her mother's, were old with knowing. "You didn't come home last night," she said, voice small. Daniel crouched to her height. "Got stuck in the storm," he answered gently, "but I found someone." He nodded toward Rex, who lay by the fire, eyes following every sound. Lila gasped. "A dog?" She moved closer, cautious but eager. Rex lifted his head, sniffed the air, then placed his muzzle gently on her knee. That was all it took. Her face lit up. "He's beautiful." Daniel smiled faintly, though his chest tightened. "He's hurt. Found him trapped near the ridge. We'll keep him here until he's better." Lila ran a careful hand along Rex's fur. "He's brave," she whispered. Then, looking up, "What's his name?" "Rex," Daniel said, and something in the way he said it made her nod solemnly, as though it had always been that name. Over the following weeks, the rhythm of their lives shifted. Daniel fixed fences, chopped firewood, and checked trail markers. Lila studied from home, her drawings scattered across the kitchen table. Mountains, deer, snow, and always Rex. The dog followed her everywhere, even curling beside her when she read aloud by the fire. He limped for a while, but his strength returned with each day. At night, Daniel often caught himself watching the pair, his daughter and the dog, bathed in the glow of the hearth. There was something soothing about it, something he hadn't felt since before the accident 3 years ago, when his wife, Emily, had died on a frozen highway outside Albany. Emily had been small, graceful, with sandy hair and laughter that made even his worst days bearable. The crash had come on a night just like the one he'd found Rex, a storm, a flash of metal, and silence. Since then, Daniel had sworn never to let winter take anything from him again. But grief doesn't melt. It just settles under the skin. Some nights, he'd wake to the sound of Lila calling softly for her mother in her sleep, and the helplessness burned deeper than the cold. One night, wind rose again, snapping at the roof like an angry hand. Daniel was reading by the window when Rex shot up, ears pricked, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Lila stirred in her sleep upstairs, but Daniel stood, alarmed. The dog bolted to the door, barking sharply, urgent. "What is it, boy?" Daniel asked, grabbing his coat and flashlight. He opened the door to a rush of icy air and the howl of the storm's return. Rex bounded into the snow, barking toward the slope behind the cabin. Daniel followed, boots crunching through the drifts. Down the ridge, a faint orange flicker glowed. Firelight. Then he saw it. A pickup truck overturned at the curve, flames licking from the engine. His pulse spiked. "Stay back!" he shouted, but Rex was already sprinting ahead, weaving through the snow like a streak of shadow. When Daniel reached the wreck, the air was thick with smoke and gasoline. A figure was slumped over the steering wheel, motionless. Without hesitation, he wrenched the door open. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The woman stirred, groaning weakly. The smell of burned rubber stung his eyes. She was in her mid-30s, tall and lean beneath a heavy coat, hair dark and tangled, streaked with melting snow. Her skin was pale olive, with faint freckles along her cheekbones. Blood trickled from a cut near her temple. When her eyes fluttered open, hazel, sharp, alive, she looked at him in confusion. "Where?" she began, but a cough racked her. "Easy," Daniel said, slipping an arm around her. "You've been in an accident. I'm getting you out." The doorframe groaned. Rex barked from behind, circling anxiously. The woman's leg was pinned beneath the dashboard. Daniel braced himself and heaved the metal upward. It gave with a screech. He pulled her free, carrying her away just as the flames flared higher. Snow hissed as sparks hit it. He laid her on the ground, checked her pulse. It was weak but steady. "Rex, blanket!" he shouted instinctively, though of course the dog couldn't understand words. Yet miraculously, Rex dashed back toward the truck, snagged Daniel's jacket from the open cab, and dragged it over. Daniel stared, half in disbelief, before wrapping it around the woman's shoulders. They trudged back to the cabin against the wind. Lila was waiting at the door, her small frame silhouetted in firelight. "Dad?" she called. Then her eyes widened at the sight of the unconscious stranger in his arms. Inside, Daniel laid the woman on the couch. Lila fetched warm water and bandages while Rex sat vigil by the hearth, eyes never leaving the stranger's face. Hours passed before she stirred again. When she did, her voice was hoarse. "You saved me," she whispered. Daniel poured her water. "Name's Daniel Cole. You're safe now." She nodded faintly. Grace Turner?" she said between breaths. "I'm a vet, was heading north to the animal rescue station." She paused, eyes flicking toward Rex. "He's beautiful." Daniel smiled faintly. "He's lucky. So are you." Grace studied him, his weathered face, the exhaustion in his shoulders, the quiet strength beneath the lines. "You live here alone?" "With my daughter," he said. "And apparently, with him now too." Grace's lips curved into a small smile, then she drifted back into sleep. Daniel watched the snow fall outside, thinking how strange it was that storms could both destroy and deliver. Beside him, Rex yawned and laid his head on his paws, content but alert. And for the first time in 3 years, Daniel felt something he hadn't dared feel since Emily's death. Hope, faint and unfamiliar, but alive. What he didn't know was that Grace Turner had brought more than just a storm behind her. Somewhere out there, a radio signal was searching for the truck she never reached, and soon enough, Silver Creek would no longer be the quiet refuge it had always been. The sun had not truly risen for days. A thick gray hung over Silver Creek, pressing down on the valley like a held breath. Snow had stopped falling, but the cold had deepened, sharp, metallic, a kind of silence that hummed in the bones. Daniel Cole shoveled a path from the porch to the barn, his breath pluming in the still air. Behind him, Rex padded carefully, the limp almost gone now, tail swaying with the quiet vigilance of a creature who had learned too much about pain. Inside the cabin, Grace Turner stirred a pot of coffee while Lila sat by the window, sketching Rex in pencil strokes both delicate and bold. Grace had been with them for a week. The bruises on her temple had faded to pale yellow, the stitches at her knee healing neatly under Daniel's careful hands. She was tall and sinewy, with a natural steadiness in how she moved, nothing wasted, nothing hurried. Her dark hair, usually pulled into a messy braid, framed a face that carried strength where softness used to be. She had seen enough: injured strays, starving horses, cruelty hidden under human excuses, and it had made her both compassionate and wary. Daniel often caught her staring out at the tree line, eyes unfocused, as if remembering another place, another winter. She looked up when Daniel came in, stamping the snow from his boots. "You work too hard for a man with frost in his beard," she teased lightly, pouring him coffee. He smiled, faint and reluctant. "Idle hands freeze faster out here." Grace's lips curved, but her gaze lingered on him. "You ever let yourself rest?" Daniel hesitated, then took the mug. Not good at it. The moment hung quiet but warm between them, until Rex barked sharply, ears pricked toward the woods. His fur bristled, tail straight. Daniel's instincts returned like a switch flipped on. "Something's out there," he said. Grace moved to the window. Through the fog of frost, a figure emerged, a man on horseback, thick coat, rifle slung across his shoulder. His presence was heavy even from a distance, the kind that made the air tense. "Friend of yours?" Grace asked carefully. Daniel's jaw tightened. "No, that's Jack Mercer." Jack dismounted near the gate and walked toward the porch, snow crunching beneath his boots. He was in his late 50s, tall, built like the trees he'd spent a lifetime felling. His face was a roadmap of weather and grief, deep lines cut from squinting against both sun and sorrow. A gray beard framed his jaw, and his eyes, pale, almost colorless, held the flat calm of someone who had made peace with violence long ago. When he reached the steps, he nodded once, curt. "Cole." "Mercer," Daniel replied, equally curt. Jack's gaze shifted to the open door, where Grace stood, and then to Rex, who now stood half in front of Daniel, hackles raised. The old rancher's hand flexed on the strap of his rifle. "That your dog?" Daniel folded his arms. "Mine now." Jack's jaw worked, a muscle ticking beneath his beard. "That dog tore up 3 of my sheep last winter, left 2 half dead. I've been tracking him since." "That's not possible," Daniel said evenly. "He was half starved when I found him, leg shattered. He's been fighting to survive, not hunting livestock." Jack took a step closer, his boots grinding ice. "You think I don't know what I saw? That mark on his flank, same one as the one that ran my fence line." Grace intervened before the temperature could drop further. "He's no stray anymore," she said calmly. "He's healing. Whatever happened before, it's over." Jack looked at her then, really looked, the way men look at someone who isn't afraid of them. "You a vet?" "I am." "Then you know some beasts don't change." Grace held his stare. "Neither do most men." The silence that followed was brittle as the icicles hanging from the eaves. Daniel stepped forward slightly. "If you've got a complaint, Jack, take it to the station. But you're not putting a bullet in a dog that hasn't hurt anyone since he got here." For a heartbeat, Daniel thought the man might actually raise his rifle. Instead, Jack exhaled through his nose, the sound harsh and tired. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. "Mercy's the kind of thing that'll bite you later." He turned, trudging back toward his horse, but before he mounted, he paused, glancing over his shoulder. "You remember the Lawson fire? When you went back for that kid and your partner didn't make it?" Daniel froze. The memory slammed into him, A flash of flames, his partner Tom screaming through the smoke, the ceiling collapsing before Daniel could reach him. Jack's voice softened, almost regretful. "You keep trying to save what's already lost, Cole. Some things don't want saving." Then he rode off, his figure swallowed by the white horizon. Daniel stood motionless long after he was gone. The only sound was the slow ticking of melting ice from the roof. Lila came down the stairs, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. "Who is that man?" Daniel blinked, pulling himself back. "Someone who's lost too much." Rex padded over, nudging his hand. Daniel sank to one knee, rubbing the dog's neck. "You're safe here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Grace crossed her arms, watching the father and dog in the golden light of the fire. "He's scared," she said quietly. Daniel looked up. "Rex?" "No," she said. "You." He didn't deny it. The truth was, Jack Mercer wasn't wrong. Daniel was afraid, not of the man, but of losing again, of caring too much too soon. That night, the storm returned, softer this time, a quiet hiss against the windows. Grace read by lamplight while Lila slept upstairs. Daniel checked the locks twice, his body still thrumming with unease. Rex lay by the door, head on his paws, ears twitching at every creak. Outside, across the valley, a rifle gleamed faintly under the moonlight. Jack Mercer sat in the saddle near the ridge, eyes fixed on the cabin. He lifted the scope to his eye, then lowered it again, sighing. Snow fell over his shoulders like forgiveness he couldn't accept. "I'm watching you, dog," he murmured into the cold. But his voice lacked hatred. It carried something closer to sorrow. Inside, unaware, Daniel looked out the window one last time before extinguishing the lamp. The darkness pressed close, whispering of things not yet finished, and in that stillness, somewhere deep in the woods, another howl answered, a sound Rex recognized not as threat, but memory. He rose slowly, tail stiff, eyes glowing in the dim light. The past was not done with any of them yet. The storm came back without warning, swift, savage, and absolute. By dusk, Silver Creek was nothing but a world of white noise. The wind howled like a living memory, shoving through cracks in the cabin walls. Daniel Cole secured the shutters, while Grace and Lila gathered blankets by the fire. Rex paced restlessly, head low, tail tense, as though he sensed the mountain itself was holding its breath. Outside, visibility dropped to nothing. Snow moved sideways, filling the valley with a shimmering chaos. Daniel glanced toward the stable and cursed under his breath. The horses still hadn't been fed. "Stay inside," he told Grace. "I'll be back in 10 minutes. Grace caught his arm. Her fingers were cold, firm. "You can't see 5 feet out there. I've walked this trail 100 times. "Not tonight, you haven't." He smiled faintly, one of those half-hearted smiles that tried to pass for courage. "Keep the fire going." Rex barked once, short and sharp, already at the door. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "All right, soldier, you're with me." They plunged into the storm. Snow hit like shards of glass, biting at exposed skin. The beam from Daniel's flashlight vanished into the blizzard almost instantly. He trudged forward, one arm shielding his face, Rex moving beside him like a dark shadow. The stable was barely 30 yards away, but it felt like crossing another world. When they reached it, Daniel forced the door open and stepped inside, breathless. The horses neighed nervously, hooves clattering. He checked their feed, adjusted the latch and turned to go, then froze. A faint sound rose through the storm, a man's shout, distant, desperate. "Help!" Daniel's pulse jumped. He recognized that voice. "Mercer," he muttered. Without thinking, he ran back into the storm. The wind tore the world apart again, but now he could make out movement. A horse half buried in snow near the ridge, its reins tangled around a fallen branch. Beside it, Jack Mercer was sprawled in the drift, motionless. "Jack!" Daniel shouted, stumbling toward him. The older man didn't answer. Rex bounded ahead, sniffing, circling the body, then barked, a fierce, commanding sound that yanked Daniel back to focus. He knelt, checked for a pulse. Faint, but there. The man was alive, barely. "You stubborn fool," Daniel growled, grabbing Mercer under the shoulders. "You couldn't just stay home, could you?" The storm screamed in answer. The ridge above them cracked like thunder. Daniel looked up just in time to see a wall of snow breaking loose. an avalanche, massive and merciless, charging straight toward them. "Rex, move!" He hauled Mercer upright, but the man's leg buckled, broken. They'd never make it back in time. Rex barked again, darting toward an old hunting shelter half buried nearby. Daniel followed the dog, dragging Mercer along. They dove inside just as the avalanche roared. Past, shaking the ground. Silence followed, a suffocating, frozen silence. Daniel lay on his back, chest heaving, snow falling from his coat. Mercer groaned beside him, pain etched deep into his weathered face. His beard was crusted with ice, eyes glassy with exhaustion. "Guess I owe you one," he muttered. "Don't flatter yourself," Daniel said, but his tone was softer than his words. Rex lay near the door, alert, ears twitching. Daniel reached into his pocket for the emergency flare, but the storm had taken it. They were trapped until morning. Hours passed in flickering lamplight. Mercer's breathing steadied, though every exhale came out ragged. Finally, he spoke, voice barely audible. "You ever stop to think maybe that dog remembers me?" Daniel looked at Rex, who was watching them both, eyes amber and knowing. "Maybe," Daniel said quietly. "But he chose not to act on it. That counts for something." Mercer gave a weak chuckle. "A man like me, I stopped believing in second chances a long time ago." Daniel shifted, his tone low. "Then maybe tonight's your reminder." The older man stared at the floor, his voice cracked. "My wife died same winter that dog showed up. Thought killing it would make the ghosts shut up." Daniel said nothing. Sometimes silence was the only mercy that mattered. When dawn finally came, the storm was gone. The sky blushed faintly pink over the snowfields. Daniel helped Mercer onto Rex's back, the shepherd standing tall despite exhaustion. Slowly, step by step, they made their way back down to the valley. Grace was waiting outside the cabin, coat pulled tight, eyes wet with relief. Lila ran to Rex, throwing her arms around his neck. "You found him," she cried. Daniel nodded. "Barely." Mercer looked up at Grace, guilt softening his voice. "I owe you an apology, ma'am, and to that dog, too." Grace smiled faintly. "He forgave you before you asked." Mercer looked at Rex, really looked, and reached out a hand. The dog hesitated, then pressed his nose gently into the man's palm, and in that small gesture, something thawed. That night, as snow glittered under the full moon, Daniel stood on the porch with Grace. Inside, Lila and Rex slept by the fire. "Think he'll come back?" she asked. Daniel looked toward the mountains. "If he does, I hope it's as a friend." But somewhere deep in the forest, a shape moved against the pale horizon. Another German shepherd, wild and lean, its eyes reflecting moonlight. Rex stirred in his sleep, ears twitching, as if answering a call only he could hear. The past was not done with them yet. Spring came to Silver Creek late that year, shy and uncertain, as though afraid to disturb the stillness winter had left behind. The mountains no longer glowed with ice, but with mist, the river beneath them swollen and restless from melting snow. For the first time in months, sunlight reached the valley floor, glinting off the tin roof of Daniel Cole's cabin like a blessing. Inside, warmth replaced silence. The smell of fresh bread mixed with the earthy scent of wet pine and something gentler, peace. Rex lay sprawled across the rug before the hearth, his coat thick and glossy again, the scar on his hind leg now a faint reminder of storms survived. Lila knelt beside him, braiding a red ribbon around his collar with solemn precision. "There," she said proudly, "you're officially part of the family." Daniel watched from the table, smiling over his mug of coffee. His beard had grown out again, streaked with silver that caught the morning light. The hard lines on his face had softened, though the quiet inside him remained, the kind that comes not from grief anymore, but from understanding. Grace Turner stepped into the room carrying a stack of papers and a steaming cup of tea. Her dark hair had grown longer, curling slightly at the ends, and the color had returned to her cheeks. Months of mountain air had given her a glow she hadn't known she was missing. "The shelter board approved the funding," she said, setting the papers down. "We can start building next week." Daniel looked up. "You serious?" Grace grinned. "Serious enough to make you haul lumber again. Rex's Haven, they're calling it, a rescue and rehabilitation center for dogs stranded in the wilderness." Lila clapped her hands, nearly knocking over her sketchbook. "Can I help? I can paint signs and bake cookies for visitors." Grace laughed. That might be the real reason people show up. The cabin filled with laughter, light, and a sense of purpose that had long been missing. Rex barked once, as if giving his approval. By afternoon, the whole valley seemed awake again. Birds flitted between thawing branches, and the snowmelt ran in silver streams down to the lake. Daniel and Grace worked outside, marking the ground where the first enclosure would be built. The air smelled of pine and promise. "Never thought I'd be running a dog rescue," Daniel said, driving a stake into the soil. Grace wiped a smear of mud from her cheek. "You're good at saving things." He chuckled softly. "You make it sound noble. It's mostly just stubbornness." "Same difference," she replied, smiling. As the sun began to dip behind the ridge, a familiar rumble echoed from the trail. A truck approached, rattling over the frozen dirt road. When it stopped, Jack Mercer stepped out, wearing his old coat patched at the elbows and carrying a wooden crate in his arms. Daniel met him halfway. "Didn't think I'd see you this soon," he said. Jack gave a short nod. "Couldn't stay away. Thought you might use a hand." He set the crate down gently. Inside were tools, saws, nails, rope, and a small jar of honey, homemade. "For the kid," he added gruffly. Grace came out, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Welcome back, Jack." The old rancher tipped his hat, embarrassment flickering across his face. "You folks were right. That dog didn't take my sheep. Caught the real one last week, a coyote with a limp. Guess I owe the both of you an apology I can't say enough times." Daniel clapped his shoulder. "Then don't say it. Just stay for dinner." Mercer's eyes softened. "You sure about that?" Grace smiled. "Positive. We could use another pair of hands." The old man chuckled. "Don't know how much I've got left, but I'll give it." As dusk fell, they worked together, raising the first posts of Rex's haven. The hammering echoed off the hills like the heartbeat of something new. Lila brought out lanterns as darkness deepened, her laughter carrying through the trees. Later, after dinner, the four of them sat by the fire while Rex dozed with his head on Lila's lap. Outside, the stars blinked to life above the snow-dusted peaks. The world seemed to exhale. Grace looked at Daniel. "You ever think about going back east?" He shook his head slowly. "Not anymore. Everything I needed found me here." His gaze fell to Lila and Rex, and then to Grace. "Besides, I've got work to do." Grace smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Then, you're not alone in it." A knock came at the door just then, soft, uncertain. Rex lifted his head, ears twitching. Daniel rose and opened it to find a teenage boy standing there, shivering. He couldn't have been older than 15, clothes torn, a small, scruffy puppy cradled in his arms. "Sorry," the boy said, voice trembling. "He was stuck in the snow near the creek. I didn't know where else to go." Daniel looked at Grace, who was already reaching for her coat. "You came to the right place," she said gently. Lila hurried to clear a spot by the fire. "Bring him here." The boy stepped inside, and the warmth hit his face like a miracle. Rex padded over, sniffed the puppy, then nudged it softly as if saying, "You're safe now." Grace checked the animal's pulse and nodded. "He'll be fine." Daniel handed the boy a mug of cocoa. "What's your name, son?" "Sam," he whispered. "Sam Mercer." Daniel blinked, then glanced at Jack, who was standing in the doorway, eyes wide. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Jack walked over, voice rough with disbelief. "You came home." Sam nodded, tears mixing with melted snow. "Didn't know where else to go, Dad." Jack's face crumpled. He pulled the boy into a hug, his rough hands trembling. Rex wagged his tail once and rested his head against both of them, as if sealing the reunion. That night, Zaz. The fire burned low. Daniel stepped outside. The air was cool, clean, filled with the smell of thawing pine. He looked toward the ridge where the first storm had nearly taken his life. Now it stood calm under the stars. Grace joined him quietly, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "That sometimes the storm doesn't come to destroy us. It comes to clear the way." From inside came laughter, Lila's, Sam's, and Jack's deep rumble joining in. Rex barked once, a single bright note that carried into the night. Above them, the sky was endless and forgiving. The mountains no longer looked like walls, but home. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel Cole knew the blizzard had finally passed. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. They come quietly, in the shape of a wounded dog, a lost boy, or a storm that breaks what needed breaking so something new can grow. In Silver Creek, Daniel, Grace, Lila, and Rex found more than safety. They found grace itself. Because maybe God doesn't always calm the storm. Sometimes, He teaches us to walk through it together. If you believe that every act of kindness carries a spark of God's plan, leave a comment below, share this story with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories about faith, compassion, and second chances. May God bless you and protect everyone who's watching tonight. May your storms lead you home.